Good morning. I'm Reverend Michelle Scott-Huffman. My pronouns are she and her. I am a white woman in my early 50s with short, dark, spiky hair and black pants and a maroon jacket, and am proud to be the minister of this congregation, First Unitarian Universalist Church of Springfield, and I have announcements that didn't make it into the script. So, before we get started, there will be a kitchen cleanup this Friday, January 27th from, it looks like 9 a.m. to ? And then noon written beside it. So if you want to know what the question mark means, the refrigerator will be cleaned out and emptied. Items to be kept need to be labeled. If some of you have, items in the refrigerator that you want to put your name on today, or if you want to come on Friday and help with the cleanup. We'll be doing coins for change. So there's a container that you can distribute your coins into when you come in each week. The coins will enhance our capital fund. That's a note from Emily Jamrock. Thank you for taking on that work. Hello again. This month, we have been talking quite a bit about finding our center. And I am increasingly convinced that we can't find our individual centers, nor can we find our communal center as a church community without getting honest with ourselves and with each other about power and privilege in our lives and their function in our society. Sometimes conversations about power and privilege can be difficult for a number of reasons. One of those reasons is that people who hold privilege that they didn't choose and can't get rid of, even if they wanted to, have associated that privilege with guilt and shame. Bell Hooks teaches that awareness is not the same thing as shame or guilt over membership in the center. The latter is self-defeating. The former is required to be an effective change agent. Another reason that conversations about power and privilege can be difficult is that many people don't have a healthy understanding of the definition of, or even the neutrality of, the word power. Some people want all of it, and they choose to wield it over others, and some want nothing to do with it, because all they've seen is the abuse of power and the ways that others have been hurt by it. They can only think of power in negative terms. In reality, power is neutral. It is simply the ability to act. And my hope for everyone in this room is that we all come to know that we are powerful beyond our greatest imaginations. And then we do everything in our power to build a just, equitable, and inclusive world. What if the best thing we can do with our power is push it out to the margins? And the best thing we can do with our privilege is center the margins. One of the ways that I think we struggle with conversations about privilege and power is in our lack of a shared language or a common understanding. So while there may be a variety of connotations floating around in our heads about words that we use in that conversation, I want to offer today a framework, a point of reference for this conversation. Luna, do you have that slide? So on the screen, as well as on the whiteboard in front of the sanctuary, there is an image of a wheel. Also, if you're in the sanctuary, at the center of each row, there are handouts under the end chair. And as an exercise of pushing the power out to the margins, I invite you to pass those down so that everyone has a copy of this piece of paper. There are many versions of this wheel that are similar, but with slight differences here and there, and even that include some major categories like religion that aren't included on this particular wheel. So I invite you to take this handout, to take the image on the screen. Hopefully on Zoom, there's a link in the chat box to a document that you can download to your own device so that you can interact with this wheel. So here's how the wheel works. The center of the wheel names the people who are sort of in power based on that particular identity. So when it comes to citizenship, if you are a natural born citizen, you hold the most power in relation to citizenship. If you came from somewhere else and you are a documented or naturalized citizen, you may be in the middle there. If you are an undocumented person in our midst, you clearly have the least power. So moving out from the center of the circle, we experience less privilege and power. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Inevitably, any model that seeks to represent wide swaths of humans with language that is always less than universal, there are probably words on here that you might not use or would prefer something different. What is it that they say? All models are wrong, some are useful. Anytime we choose language, anytime an infinite human being chooses language to represent something that talks about the impacts in other people's lives, we're not going to get it right. But we have to start somewhere. Our exercise here today is to begin to name our privilege and power in ways that are aspirational. As a person, for instance, who is fairly neurotypical, how do I use the power that grants me to make space for people who are more neurodivergent? Or in the language I prefer, how do we make space for neurodiversity? Because who gets to say what's typical anyway? As an American citizen who understands that this country was built on immigrant experiences, how do I use the power of my vote and my voice to make this a welcoming and safe place for refugees and other immigrants today? As a person with reasonably decent financial means, what do I do with my money that lifts up those who have less? You see, privilege is what allows you to exert power. And as one writer has stated in the immortal words of Spider-Man's Uncle Ben, with great power comes great responsibility. So where are your demographic privilege points? What power do they afford you? And most importantly, for our purposes today, what are you doing with them? If you were to map out your own points on the wheel and begin to get a visual representation for the ways that you experience power and privilege, as well as oppression and marginalization, you would likely end up with something that looks like an amorphous blob. Mine actually looks like a star with one of its points sheared off. It's there on the board. To simplify, the closer your point is to the center in any category, the more privilege you hold, and thus the more power you can exert. On the other hand, in those categories where your point is located toward the outer edge of the wheel, the more likely you are to experience marginalization. For most of us, it's a mixed bag. Though it's true that some folks here are pretty close to the center in most of the categories shown, one of the things that this visual representation demonstrates for us is the concept of intersectionality. The ways that all of our privileges and oppressions mix and match and make us the unique people that we are. Law professor and American civil rights activist Kimberly Crenshaw writes, intersectionality acknowledges the complex relationship between social identities and systems of power and oppression. Given the fluid, relational, and social construction of identities, intersectional paradigms recognize that every person has multiple and diverse identities. For example, race, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, ability, beliefs, and worldview that combine in unique ways to shape our perspectives and experiences with oppression and privilege. In this context, intersectionality recognizes that oppression does not exist in a vacuum, but rather intersecting oppressions work together in producing injustice. Likewise, intersecting privileges work together in dismantling systems of injustice. A Vanderbilt University document designed to introduce students to concepts of power and privilege notes that privilege operates in personal, interpersonal, cultural, and institutional levels, and gives advantages, access, favors, and benefits to members of dominant groups, often at the expense of members of marginalized groups. Privilege is almost never an earned state. It is commonly invisible to or taken for granted by those who have it, and it's conferred based on those whose characteristics match the dominant groups, whether they want the privileges or not, and regardless of their stated intent. So privilege, if we're to be honest, is the comfortable seat. It's the place where we can hang out, the place where we need not experience much tension or turbulence if we don't wish to. But what it isn't, if we're not using it for a higher purpose anyway, is a place of growth. And I want to say this again, so please hear me. Awareness of our privilege is not a source of shame. I've been in so many conversations where people who are at the margins are asking for justice and equity, and we can't get anywhere because when we point out the privilege that enables the power that keeps these people at the margins, those of us who are at the center, those of us who hold the privilege tend to get defensive, and we can't hear what folks are saying to us. So awareness of our privilege is not a source of shame. For most of us, like I said before, the privileges that we hold based on our identities are not something that we can opt out of. It just is. This is who we are. But privilege is a place where we can say things like, I don't see color, I just see people, if we are white. Invalidating the experience of people of color whose lives are impacted every day by the fact that people do see color, and skin color is still the basis for discrimination and violence. Able-bodied privilege allows us to move throughout the world every day in spaces that are not conducive for or even safe for persons with disabilities, but to never think about who we don't see there and why, or who is there and is harmed in the place and harmed by our actions of oblivion, really. Again, not as a point of shame and guilt, but awareness is the thing that helps us know better and do better. I saw a picture the other day on Facebook of a truck with a trailer hitch backed up to a sidewalk. And it was backed up so far that someone with mobility issues, or even just someone who needed to walk on the sidewalk and needed a little bit more space, couldn't walk there because the person backed their truck up so far. How many times have I done that? That was the first time I was like, oh my goodness, I know better now, so I can do better now. Heterosexual privilege is the ability to casually sit and watch the news without anxiety and anger when for the umpteenth time there's a highly public debate about whether or not my marriage is valid and can or should be protected by the law. And we can choose to rest in our privilege, thankful that someone else always has it a little worse than we do. That's the most horrible thing that we say, right? Just, oh, I'm okay. Somebody's got it worse than me. We can sit in that, or we can choose to sit in the discomfort of knowing that somebody's got it worse than we do and not standing for that. Remembering those who don't hold the same privileges as us and making a commitment to do something constructive and meaningful with it. and not the thing that we think is needed from our place of privilege and power, from our infinite paternalistic wisdom, but what we know is needed because we listen to the voices of those on the margins, and they asked us for what they needed. Bell Hooks was an African-American author, feminist, and social activist who the world lost just over a year ago. Her writing focused on the interconnectivity of race, class, and gender, and their ability to produce and perpetuate systems of oppression and domination. She notes that the people at the margins in any category can only move in so far, and that it's the responsibility of the center to move out. Because there are those who want to protect and hoard the power at the center, and they will do everything they can to make it so. That's why it's on those of us who find ourselves in the center to do the work of listening, restoration, reparation, and inclusion. This faith, Unitarian Universalism, has always been about bringing the margins to the center, pushing back against Orthodox Christian ideas that were exclusionary. For many of us, our own spiritual path, when we say it out loud, is about grounding ourselves in an honest understanding of who we are and how we relate to others in ways that are kind and welcoming and just. So today I want to invite you to lean into this idea of power and privilege in a way that allows you to really get honest about the space you hold in this world and what you want to do with it to make the world a better place. At the end of the service, I invite those of you who are here in the sanctuary to come up to the whiteboard and to plot your points, to plot your amorphous blob or your starfish without a head or whatever it is, so that we can begin to see the ways that we as a community hold lots of power and privilege, so we can see who's missing from the conversation, so we can see the ways that all of our experiences of living in this world can come together to make the world a better place. And for those of you who are watching virtually, I invite you to plot that on that piece of paper and maybe share a picture of it in our members and friends Facebook group, or email it to me and we'll add it to the mix, or however you want to do that. I want to close with these words from UU minister, Reverend Teresa Soto, who's the author of a book called Spilling the Light, Meditations on Hope and Resilience. To be free, you must embrace the breadth of your own experience without apology, even if they try to take it from you. You must know not that you can do whatever you want. You are not a kudzu vine eating entire hillsides for the purpose of feeding your own lush life. You must know instead that inside you are entire universes, milky blue, magenta, and gold, expanding. But to actually be free, you must know and you must fight for the entire universes inside of everyone else. Being free is not a license, but a promise. Blessed be, and amen.